Hello, friends. Today's story is about a young Jordanian man named Obaid and his encounter with a strange old man on the Jordanian-Iraqi border. Before we begin, don't forget to support the channel by subscribing and turning on the notification bell so I can bring you more thrilling and exciting stories. Let's get started. Obaid begins his story by saying, "I am a Jordanian citizen from the Ma'an Governorate, living in a village near the Jordanian-Saudi border. I'll tell you about a terrifying incident that happened to me in 1990, one that almost ended my life and left me with vitiligo and impaired vision. Back then, I was a young man in my 20s, full of energy, working as a cigarette smuggler between Jordan and Saudi Arabia through the village of Al-Mudawar, located along the border. At the time, the borders were easy to cross and not as heavily monitored as they are today. I worked in this field with my uncle Hassan, who was 35 years old. He taught me everything about smuggling, and we became partners in this trade until one day, we decided to change our destination to Iraq instead of Saudi Arabia. One night, my uncle came to me and said, "Get ready tonight, we're taking the goods across the Jordanian-Iraqi border." The goods were loaded onto a small pickup truck, and the owner of the shipment told my uncle, "If you make it to Iraq, the truck is yours. But if you get caught, don't mention my name." We set off at night toward Al-Ruwaishid in the Mafraq Governorate, rested there for a while, and then continued our journey in the evening toward the Iraqi border. We crossed a remote area far from the main checkpoint, carefully turning off some of the car's lights to avoid drawing attention. After traveling a long distance through hills and valleys, we reached an area near an Iraqi village. Suddenly, we heard gunfire in our direction. My uncle quickly turned off the car's lights and shouted, "Get out and run toward the farms! Don't stop!" Terrified, I ran as fast as I could until I found shelter behind one of the farms. Shortly after, we saw Iraqi patrols surrounding the truck in the distance. We realized that getting caught would mean torture, or possibly execution. So we decided to flee the area on foot, heading toward a desolate region behind the farms. During our escape, we came across a large wall. We climbed it only to discover it surrounded a dark cemetery. The scene was terrifying, but we had no choice but to hide among the graves. As we walked through the darkness, we found a large pit, though not very deep. We decided to hide in it, hoping the patrols wouldn't find us. I sat inside the pit, trembling with fear. The policemen were searching the area with flashlights, but they didn't see us. After a while, my uncle climbed out of the pit to check if the area was clear of soldiers. He instructed me not to leave no matter what happened, even if they caught him. I remained alone in the pitch-black darkness, hearing strange noises and feeling the eerie isolation of the place. Suddenly, I felt as if my uncle had returned to the pit. I grabbed his hands, clinging tightly, and said, "Uncle, have they left?" He didn't respond. I asked again, "Have the soldiers gone?" Still no answer. He says, "I felt a sense of eeriness and a shiver run through my body. I reached out to feel my uncle and placed my hand on his back, but all I found was a rough texture. It felt like I was touching a spine. While I was feeling my uncle, I asked him, "Uncle, why aren't you speaking? Are you trying to scare me? But I'm not afraid." Then he said, I touched his head and found that he had no hair, even though my uncle's hair was very thick. I began to feel terrified. When I touched his hand, it was nothing but bones with no flesh, and his nails were very long. That's when I screamed, which frightened my uncle Hassan, who rushed toward me saying, "What's wrong? What happened?" He says, I couldn't speak. When my uncle turned on the flashlight, I saw an old man next to me, nothing but bones, with a hunched back. I was terrified and began running between the graves, screaming. My uncle chased me, calling out, "Obaid, Obaid," until he caught me and tried to calm me down, saying, "What's wrong? Calm down, nothing bad will happen to you." Obaid says, I was trembling in fear, my eyes fixed on the pit. I couldn't speak until I finally calmed down. When my uncle asked me what I saw, I told him what happened, but he said he didn't see anything. I felt like I had seen something unnatural. We left the place in shock. We were running, then walking, until we reached a wild area. There, my uncle gathered some firewood and lit a fire to warm ourselves and reassure us, after we had gotten far from the police patrols. But as I sat warming up, I couldn't stop thinking about the man I saw in the pit, and the fear started creeping back. He continued, "While we were sitting by the fire, an old man approached us. He started speaking and asked, 'What are you doing here?' My uncle replied, 'We are Bedouin travelers. We stopped here to warm up a little before continuing our journey.' The man sat down and began talking to my uncle, but he kept staring at me the whole time. I tried to avoid his gaze, but every time I looked at him, I found him staring directly at me, which increased my fear. Then I looked at his hands and was shocked. I looked at my uncle in fear. My uncle noticed my fear, turned to the man and said, 'I seek refuge in Allah from the accursed Satan.' Suddenly the man vanished, as if he had evaporated in front of us. When I saw the man's hands, his bones, and his long nails, I remembered the man I had seen in the pit, and I was sure it was a devil. My uncle, whose heart was made of iron and never feared anything, tried to calm me down again, saying, 'These places are often haunted, so don't be afraid and seek refuge in Allah.' I felt like I was going to pass out, while my uncle remained strong and unshaken by what had happened. My uncle says, 'Since I saw that man, I knew he was a devil, and I talked to him because I didn't want you to be scared.' Obaid added, 'After that, we put out the fire and decided to walk toward the main road. As we were walking, I heard footsteps behind us. I said to my uncle, 'Do you hear that?' My uncle said, 'Don't turn around, they're trying to scare us.' I held on tightly to my uncle, my body shaking, until we reached the asphalt. We tried to stop cars, but the place was desolate, and it was around 3 a.m. No cars stopped for us. After a while, we saw a truck slowly approaching us. As it got closer, I looked to the other side and saw that same old man standing and staring at me. His back was hunched and his eyes were glowing. I felt an overwhelming fear and clung to my uncle. My uncle said, 'Stand by my side until the truck stops for us.' I was screaming, 'Look! That devil is back again. He's right there.' But my uncle couldn't see him, and I realized he was targeting me alone. We continued walking and trying to stop cars until finally, a truck driver stopped and asked what we were doing there. We told him we were from Jordan and had gotten lost in the desert after our car broke down. He agreed to take us to the Trabeel border area. When we arrived, a police patrol stopped us and took us to the station, where they interrogated us. We told them we had entered Iraq illegally looking for work. They said, 'Confess. How did you enter? What are you smuggling?' We replied, 'We're not smuggling anything and we don't have anything on us.' After that, they began beating and interrogating us. They took us to a detention cell at the border station. Obaid recalls, 'They kept beating and questioning us until the next day, but we didn't admit to anything. When they finally put us in the cell, it was around 2 p.m. Exhausted, I laid my head down on the mattress beside my uncle and fell asleep until midnight." He continues, "I woke up feeling extremely tired and my body was drenched in sweat despite the freezing cold weather. I decided to lay my head down again and try to sleep until morning. But the prison was pitch dark, and I started to feel breathing close to me, as if someone was right beside me. I turned to my right side, using my arm as a pillow. Suddenly I felt another hand grabbing me. I thought it was my Uncle Hassan's hand, so I began to feel it. That's when I realized it was the same hand I had touched in the pit." He adds, "I jumped from my spot and opened my eyes to see a horrifying old man sitting in front of me, his eyes blazing like fire. I screamed loudly, 'I seek refuge in Allah! I seek refuge in Allah!' My uncle woke up to my screams and looked around but saw nothing. He started calming me down, saying, 'Seek refuge in Allah. You must be hallucinating from the cold and exhaustion.' I tried to believe him, but I couldn't shake the fear. I kept watching the corner of the room from time to time, but the dim light made it hard to see anything clearly. I looked at my uncle and saw that he had fallen asleep again. I forced myself to sleep, but barely half an hour later I woke up and decided to go to the bathroom in the corner of the prison." He continues, "When I reached the bathroom door, I heard the sound of running water. as if someone was showering. I thought they had brought in a new prisoner while we were sleeping, so I waited outside the door to use the bathroom. I stood there for half an hour, but the sound continued, and no one came out. I knocked on the door saying, "Hey, you've been in there too long. I need to use the bathroom." But no one answered. I decided to peek inside to check, but there was no one there. I finally went in to relieve myself. As I was leaving the bathroom, I saw that same old man standing in front of me. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. What terrified me even more was when the old man said, "No one will hear you." In an instant, he grabbed me and slammed me hard onto the bathroom floor. I felt like my soul was about to leave my body. Obaid adds, "My uncle heard the sound and started looking for me. When he reached the bathroom door and knocked, the old man vanished in an instant. I could barely move and blood was pouring from my nose. I dragged my body and with great effort managed to open the bathroom door. When my uncle saw me in that state, he rushed to get help. They took me to a health unit and one of the workers at the center came to wipe the blood and examine me. But I saw the old man again standing in the corner of the room staring at me. I didn't tell anyone what I saw so they wouldn't think I had lost my mind. The next day, they took us to the police station, took our fingerprints, and then released us. We returned to our village in Jordan. Obaid says, "I kept seeing the old man everywhere, in the room, in the corner of the house, even in my dreams. My life turned upside down, and I was bedridden because of my mental state. One night, I saw him approaching me while I was asleep, trying to touch my feet and pressing down on them forcefully. I tried to scream, but I was paralyzed. I woke up completely shattered. The next day, I noticed white spots appearing on my body, which began to spread gradually until I developed vitiligo. My vision also started to weaken." He continues, "They took me to a religious scholar to read over me and treat me. The treatment lasted a full month, and during that time I committed to prayer and reciting the supplications. Thanks to God, I stopped seeing the old man, and I never saw him again. But my life was never the same. The vitiligo spread all over my body, and I suffered severe weakness in my vision. What happened in that prison left a huge impact on my life, and only God knows my condition. My dear friends, we have reached the end of our story for today. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to support us by liking the video and sharing your thoughts and ideas in the comments. Your support encourages us to bring you more interesting and exciting content. Thank you, and we'll see you in the next video.